afternoon, friends and colleagues. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe. Welcome to this DCR session, which for a change will not involve dentistry. You won't hear a word mentioned about coronavirus or PPEs or herd immunity or anything related to COVID-19. It's going to be a special session, or maybe I should say an extraordinary session, in that it's out of the realm of what we're used to hearing on webinars these days regarding the virus and our practices. What I hope to have it deal with is how we can function in all this time that we now have our hands, how to eliminate the stress, the ennui, be able to do something that's creative, interesting, instead of binge watching Ozark or Mrs. Maisel, is that her name? That was a good series though, or the Kavinsky Method, that was also a good series. But instead of that, I want to show you how I deal with idle time, and have for many, many years, utilizing the main avocation that I've developed since childhood, and that is drawing and painting. And I hope to be able to show you how easy it is for you to be able to achieve this and become facile in drawing, because there's two things really that are involved with art, I believe, and that is having natural talent. Some people have more natural talent than others. But the second is training. And we can be trained, you and I and everyone else, in various techniques, whether it's in dentistry to prepare a crown or using instrumentation to place an implant. We learn these techniques. And in drawing and painting, there are techniques that you can learn, practice, and become facile with. So let's get started with that. So for the next part of this session, we're going to learn to draw. And forgive me, those of you who have drawing techniques and practice it and have sketchbooks, this is going to be basic drawing 101 to start. And if everyone enjoys this and we have a lot of likes, we can carry on in other sessions to proceed to more advanced drawing and even painting techniques if there's interest. So at this point, I'm going to take my surgical cap off and I'm going to change hats. And I'm going to become the street French artist that you see in Montmartre. So let's get started.
Thanks, Peachy. You've done well today. You've done all the floors, sweeping. This is the last room for mopping. Then we must just do that dishwasher and make lunch for the kids. Can you pick up those shoes? Just pick up those shoes there, please.
Okay, so we need tools to do drawing and also painting and sculpting and whatever, just as we need tools to, again, prepare a tooth for receiving a restoration or preparing a site for an implant placement. We need the proper equipment. So there are various types of pencils. For our purpose today, we're going to use a basic store-bought typical pencil with the little eraser on the bottom, things that you get in school supply stores for your kids in the fall, and hopefully this fall they'll be going to school. And it's an HB pencil, it's called. Pencils are categorized by their hardness, H being hard, and B pencils, such as this, you'll see the little B there, is soft. And then there's various degrees. There's H, there's H2, there's H3, H4s, etc. And that's the degree of hardness. Similarly with Bs, there's B2, B3, B4, etc. And that produces a hard and a more pronounced darker tone. For our purpose today, I don't want to confuse you. Maybe later on we can get into the degrees of pencils that we'll use, but we'll deal with just a typical HB pencil. There are drawing elements that we have to be aware of, and we're going to go through them with this session. So what are the drawing elements? One is line. We draw a line. And there are different kinds of lines. There are contour lines. There are gestural lines. And there are lines that provide perspective. The other thing we have to consider next to a line is form. So what does form do? Form basically means shapes. You know, i.e., circle, square, triangle, etc. The next element to deal with is value. Value basically means tone. Basically, that is shades of gray. And I don't mean the book. If any of you read it, see me later. The next thing to consider is light. The source of that light is going to provide a certain transition from light to dark. And it's going to provide contrast, which makes drawings exciting, and we'll get to see that as we carry on. Next thing in the element to consider is composition. Which means the position of the images that we're trying to create in space. And the last element is color, but that's more complex and more involved. But once learned, color optics, complementary colors, utilization of a color wheel that goes through the spectrum of colors, we can get involved in that if there's a lot of interest and we want to carry on with future programs. But let's deal just with these 5 in terms of drawing for our purposes of Drawing 101. We have to start, as with all endeavors, with a warm-up. Okay, as in any endeavor, being a sporting event or you're just going to go out and have a jog, you're going to warm up. If you go to the hockey arena, you'll see them shooting the puck at the goalie and the goalie doing stretches. We go to the baseball game, before the game starts, you're going to see the outfielders throwing the ball around. The players are going to be in the batting cage and take turns hitting the ball and doing stretches and running around the field. So they warm up. So in art and drawing, it's no different. First of all, to warm up, I want you to understand the holding of this instrument, of this pencil. I hope all of you have some. You can use just plain printing paper, but have a good supply of them because we're going to run through a lot of exercises. I don't want you holding the pencil like this, like you're going to write printing and beautiful cursive alphabet. I want you to hold the pencil further back, maybe 2/3 along, and instead of using the finite muscles of your fingers to draw, I want you to get used to using the muscles of your wrist and bending and turning and even your arm, just like a conductor with a baton leading an orchestra. So we're going to do warm-up. And I want you to start just with little small circles, lightly, and sort of overlap them. Keep the pencil on the paper, and then make your pressure a little firmer, and you'll get darker circles, and make them a little bigger, and vary the degree of pressure, some light, some dark, and spread them around the paper, circles, circles, some darker, some smaller, some bigger, as we move around the paper. And we start to see maybe some kind of form developing, but mainly you're getting used to this warm up and feel for the instrument in your hand. Okay, remember, drawing is made up of marks, points, lines, shapes. So I want you to move over from these little circles and just make a dot. And then try again with your hand being loose and moving liquidly, is that a word? Make a circle. Make another circle around that, and another circle around that, and widen the circles. Make each circle a little wider than the next. Doesn't matter if it's perfect, just want you to get the feel for the circles. And then join lines, striations like spokes in a wheel, off to the periphery, just to get a feel of lines and circles. Let's make another dot, and instead of a round circle, let's make an elliptical form, like so. And then another one beside it, and 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 another one beside it. And now we're seeing a different kind of form. Let's also join lines to the periphery, and we start to maybe see some dimension and more of a shape to that. Another dot, and this time lay the ellipse flatly, like so, around the circle. And again, a little wider. These initial ones close together, and as you go towards the periphery, wider and wider. And again, let's join them up. And we're starting to see some sort of perspective going on here, which we'll get into a little later. The last thing I want you to do is just take the pencil and move it around on the page. A little darker here, never letting it leave the page. Lighter up here, darker over here, and just scroll around, doodle, 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 like so. Very nice. That's what I want you to get used to. And you may start to see some sort of form in there. You might see something in there. I don't know, what do I see? There's maybe a head over here, and a shoulder over here, and a rump and a leg coming over here, and another one over there. And I'm starting to sort of see a form here, aren't I? Just with those squiggles. So practice that. It's a lot of fun. You'll see what you can come up with. Let your imagination run wild. The next thing we're going to do in the warm-up is put some lines together. Again, with the wrist action, just a straight line. Everyone can do that. Try to put a straight line parallel to it and close to it. And another one beside it. And another one beside it, etc. And vary the pressure. Close together lines, a little darker, vary the pressure, a little lighter, a little darker. And then widen this, get the lines wider apart as we move along. We're starting to see elements of what could be called shading, right? The next step, with those vertical lines, I want you to draw horizontal lines. Same thing. Close together, heavy pressure initially, and then widen the lines as you come down the page. Now, this is called cross-hatching. And this is the way you can mold a form with a pencil. Renaissance artists, if you look at their old drawings, like Michelangelo's or Da Vinci's or Raphael's, and into the Baroque drawings of Rembrandt, they use cross-hatching a lot. So look at them very closely if you have a book of, or you go to a museum and see these works of art, you'll see that they utilize cross-hatching. And we'll see how that comes into play later when we start to do figures and objects that we can identify with. The last thing is take, with this cross-hatching, instead of vertical and horizontal lines, let's put them on a little angle. So let's make some lines on an angle like so, and again, close together, and then move it around. Let's move them at another angle up here, close together, and some over here, close together, and maybe some down here. And let's overlap them a little bit. Now cross-hatching. Let's do that. And make some darker, like so. And perhaps a little lighter up here, not quite as much pressure on the pencil. And move it around. Different tangents. And cross them. Cross-hatch. Cross-hatch. And what are we starting to see, perhaps? Is there a form at all that we're projecting with these lines? And let's put something in the middle that's a little darker. And a little lighter crosshatch lines out here, and we may be formulating what might be considered perhaps a tree. And we'll get into drawing landscapes a little later, again, if everyone's interested, but this is how we progress and start to shape images. Okay, we had talked about various elements at the beginning of this talk, about line and form, value, light, all the elements. So the first element we're going to deal with is line. We've done our warm-ups. And what does a line do? The lines are foundations for our drawings. It defines shape, it's geometric, and it describes surfaces. And I don't have to, and it separates one form from another. So lines are very important. So I want you to start by developing a quality of the lines in this exercise. It's going to be a little boring, but it's important. I kind of think it's fun, so I don't find it boring. Let's, again, we're using our wrist and not drawing a straight line slowly, although you can do that. But what I want you to get used to is using that wrist motion, planting your fleshy part of your hand on the paper and just doing that. Flick it up and down. And keep the lines close together initially, and maybe dark, heavy pressure, close together. And then widen the lines, separate them wider from one another with less pressure, gradually, less pressure, less pressure, less pressure, less pressure, less pressure. Are we starting to see some sort of shading image here that's giving us a little bit more 3 dimensions, isn't it? And then we can curve the lines. Again, just rotate the wrist like you're leading the orchestra with a baton. So make a little curve and keep the curves close to one another. Heavy pressure, Make them dark initially, keep the curve, lighten the pressure, widen the marks, the curvature that you're making. Oh boy, now we're really starting to see some form develop, aren't we? Just by doing that. Quite simple. Let's do some more lines. And we're going to vary the position of the pencil. So we're using the point, but just with the wrist, of course. But if we change position in our hand and move the pencil so that it's lying on our palm, and we grip it like so, and we move it, we can move the pencil more on its side and make a stroke. Make a line, lightly. If we lay the pencil even flatter and make a really dark line, we can change the quality of that line, can't we? Okay, good. Now let's, for instance, interest's sake, vary the pressure and the marks we're making on the paper. So a line and lighten the line and make it darker and thicker, and lighten the line and make it really thick, and get a feeling for interrupted lines. Do it again, light, dark, lay it really on its side, flat, light, a little dot maybe, flat, a line, flat, and we're starting to be able to manipulate the pencil and get various marks. And again, we can do S-shaped curves. Let's do some of that. Try to keep the other line parallel to it. Kind of looks like a snake, doesn't it? There's his tongue coming out. Forked tongue. Let's make a line, a transverse line, and then a flatter line, and like a step, a lighter line and a flatter line, and a lighter line and a flatter line, and a lighter line. And we're changing the position all the time of this pencil. Light, flat, dark, light, flat, dark, light, flat, dark, light, flat, dark. So now we're being able to see how we can manipulate the pencil and get all kinds of different marks and effects, just the way we hold the pencil and the pressure we put on the pencil on the paper. Okay, that's line quality. The next thing we want to talk about is line contour. Very important, because that's describing, it's descriptive. It's descriptive, and it's trying to provide for the viewer an image that we're going to create or trying to create. So let's do a contour of an object. I'm going to make this contour and not leave the paper. And I want you to try to follow this and do one yourself. I think that kind of looks like an automobile. Let's try something else that's a little more animated. Let's do this, for example. Not leaving the paper. Anyone tell me what that sort of looks like? I think it looks like an elephant somewhat, but from a perspective that I'll show you later. One other thing that's a little more difficult, if we want to try a contour of a human form, tell me if you think this is a human form. Shoulder, elbow, knee, thigh, another knee. Let's come down here, foot, calf, another calf, another foot, and let's throw in one more shoulder and another hand to give support to this form. And this kind of looks like chalk on the sidewalk at a crime scene where there's been a murder, doesn't it? But I think you could tell that it's a human contour. Now let's take these contour lines and make them a little more vibrant. Let's create some excitement. So we had that. Let's quickly do that human form again. I'll do it very quickly. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to use that contour line, but then I'm going to make what are called gesture lines. Now remember we were doing squiggles and little circles to warm up? So let's start at the head with gesture lines. And this is creating action. This is what the gesture lines are doing to create a little more drama to your drawing. So let's start at the head and little circles like we were doing. Just the head. Let's go over to the shoulder. Keep it moving. Okay, we may want to increase the, here's the forearm, the elbow. Keep it moving, gesturing the shapes of the curvature of the whatever we're trying to draw. Here's a forearm coming out here to where the hand is, moving back to the body, the torso. Torso kind of has curves in it to give the shape of the form. And let's draw this knee, and let's come down along the calf and out to the foot. The buttocks, the other knee, again the thigh, or calf I should say, thigh's up here. Make the knee more pronounced here because it's coming forward, we want to see it more. Same with this foot, a little darker as it projects forward. There's the elbow coming up here, and he's kind of leaning on his chin, his head, and his arm coming out here to give him support on the ground. So now we've created some action, haven't we? From a contour form to a gesture form, and we kind of know what this guy's doing. So, gesture lines. I want you to practice that. Think of various forms. You don't necessarily have to have a reclining person. You can have a contour of a head and a shoulder and a breast and a butt and a leg and another leg. And that's a contour. But if I start doing this, shoulder, arm, belly, again, a stand-up person, but all just with contours and gestures. But it gives some action to the form. Next element we're going to look at is form. So we've done line, and form gives us shapes, like a square or a triangle, and it also gives us perspective. Let's start with something, and if Steve Bongard is watching, Steve has always told me he can't draw, he can't even do a stick figure, he can't draw a straight line. Well, let's look at simple form. Steve, if you're listening, or anyone else, draw a straight line with the wrist, straight up and down. And beside it, draw 2 horizontal lines. And then below that, about midway down, a little V. And then under that, a little curve. Oh boy, and let's put a circle around it. And Steve, you just drew a head. Isn't that interesting? Now let's take that round form, make a circle. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Make mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, not just in drawing. I've learned from them though, that's the main thing. Now, remember we talked about curves, following curves? Let's follow this curve with adjacent lines. And at the periphery, a little darker. And as we move to the middle, let's make them wider. And let's start the other end and follow the curves with close together, dark lines, and as we move towards the center, wider. And what's happening? We're starting to get some form to this ball, aren't we? And it all has to do with lines and gradation of pressure that we're putting on the lines. Is everybody having fun so far? I hope so. Let's do a cylinder next, another shape. So let's draw a curve on top and two lines beside each other, parallel, and a curve on the bottom. And let's start on the side of this, and again, we'll do our lines. Everybody do this, close together, straight, and then widen as we get to the middle with less pressure. And then let's follow the curve of the base of this and do some curved lines, like with cross hatching. And a little darker at the periphery. Just follow them along. And then a little wider and less dark as we get to the middle of this form. Oh boy. Now we're starting to get some three-dimension, and we're starting to get some shading. So practice that. Let's try one other thing here. Let's do a curve like so, and another curve like so. And let's have a point here and a point there. And let's follow the curve. And as we get to the next curve, we'll widen our stroke. And same here. On this side, follow the curve, and then widen it as we come forward. What might that start to maybe look like? Well, let's if we put a row of trees in here and a couple of big trees up there, and then maybe some plowed field over here and another plowed field over there, some trees, and then maybe a big tree with some leaves. We're sort of starting to get what looks like maybe a landscape. This is very rough, of course, but that's how we used these various strokes and the pressure and the way we manipulate the curves and the lines and the squiggles. So all of this combined is what drawing is all about. Let's get a little more complicated, but not that much more complicated. And we're going to start to deal with perspective, because that's very important in terms of if you want to create an image. Now we're talking about basically representational things in these art forms. We're not talking about abstract art, although under any good drawing or painting, there is an abstract image that makes it pleasing in terms of its degree of value and the way it's composed in space on the picture plane. So even a realistic drawing has an abstract, non-objective quality to it if it's good. At any rate, let's look at a typical square, two lines parallel to one another. Two lines joined, okay? Interesting, everybody drew a square. Now inside the square, let's put a line, okay, in the middle. And then outside the square, we're going to be outside the box now, we're going to make a parallel line to that. Now, let's join these lines. That point to that point, this point to this point, this point to this point, that point to that point, that point to that point, and that point to that point. Oh boy, we just made a three-dimensional box, didn't we? Interesting. See this line? Let's not draw that line. Let's draw two parallel lines. I'm sorry, one parallel line. Two parallel lines on top. We're not going to draw this line now, remember that. And let's draw this line that was outside the box. There's one inside, and the one that's outside the box. And let's join these lines, that, and that, that. Okay, so let's eliminate this line for interest's sake, and we'll join up these other lines as before, but there's nothing to join here, is there? Except we're joining this to that and that to that. We've eliminated this one line. But what kind of form do we have now? It's totally different, isn't it? In this form, it looks like we're looking into the box. In this form, it looks like this is projecting out towards us. Totally different perspective. Interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting. Now let's look at some other kinds of forms and lines. For example, if we had a bird's eye view and we're looking at a railroad track, okay, we're going to have two parallel lines, and we're looking down, and there's the ties that join the railroad tracks parallel to one another and equidistant, right? So there are trains going down here. But we rarely do that unless we're skydiving or in a helicopter floating around and looking straight down at the railroad tracks. But we rarely do that. We're not birds, although we'd like to be. So usually lines converge. Correct? That's the railroad track. We're looking down the track. We have a horizon line. And these struts, these railway ties, are close together, close to the horizon line. And then they, as they approach us, they get farther apart, don't they? And bigger. That's more of what we see looking down the railroad track. Excuse me. So we're going to look at some ideas of perspective. First of all, let's have a picture frame. This is our frame. Let's draw a horizon line. And we don't want to have we're going to create what's called a vanishing point, and we don't want it in the middle. We want it off to the side a little bit, so let's put a dot right there. That's our vanishing point. Okay. Now, from this vanishing point, let's draw a straight line down, and then have spokes from the vanishing point coming towards us. And remember, it's going to get wider as it comes towards us. And let's do it here as well. Interesting, isn't it? Now we can take, in terms of perspective, we can take a box, those boxes we were making, and follow these lines.
what have we got? We've got like looks like maybe a truck coming down here down a road, isn't it? And that's perspective, isn't it? If we follow these lines, which are a different viewpoint, and we draw two lines like this, like our box, and follow these lines of perspective, it gives us a different viewpoint, doesn't it? As we proceed, as we progress towards the horizon line, and these images are realistic looking because that's the way we observe imaging as we view towards the horizon in any given moment. So this is more realistic, obviously. I don't want to totally confuse you, but if we do another box, I just want you to practice these techniques. And here's our horizon line again. But we've got two vanishing points this time, one on this side and one on that side. And let's spread our lines out close together here and here as we progress outwards. And let's have this vanishing point also have lines that are diverging as they come to the periphery of the page. And now let's draw a box, our box following these lines here. And a box towards this vanishing point. And now, what have we got? We've got sort of a building, don't we? And there's two vanishing points. So this is 2-point, this is 1-point perspective up here, 1-point perspective. And this is 2-point perspective. And now, if we were to really want to have a realistic image, we can put a roof on this. Again, follow back to the vanishing point. You can put a chimney. We can put an awning, if we like. A door. Follow those lines emanating from the vanishing point. Interesting. So we've got a house. Let's put a window over here. Another window over there. Following those lines of progression towards the vanishing points. So now we've created 2-point perspective. So I want you to practice these techniques because they're important if you want to do kind of a cityscape or landscape down the road, and we're going to get into those as we progress through these lessons. Okay, this is getting really exciting now because we're going to get into some really realistic looking things. So far we've been doing boxes and cylinders and round shapes and square shapes. So let's do now what's really going to create some visual realistic imaging, and that's called value. Very important. And what does value mean? Well, it gives us the contrast of light and dark. Okay, also called tone, so-called grayscale. Well, what does that mean? Contrast, stark contrast, are two values. Let's draw a triangle. Rectangle. Everybody draw a rectangle. Put a line in the middle. On one end of this triangle, rectangle, I'll be all right. Color it in dark, very dark. So contrast is the play of extreme dark to extreme light. Some people say, well, white and black are not really colors. I don't agree. I think they are colors, but when we get into colors, we'll talk about that. But right now we're talking about value and contrast. But most things that we look at aren't really just dark and white or black and white. Although some people look at life as being black and white. But as I think most of us who have had any experience in life know that life is shades of gray. So let's do a rectangle and divide the rectangle into, let's say, five squares. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So grayscale. Let's do the darkest at one end, very dark. Okay, a lot of pressure, a lot of darkness. Now, let's modulate the second square with just a little lighter tone, not as dark as number 1. So that's number 2. Number 3, even lighter. Let's make this a little darker. And this even lighter. So now we're starting to see shades of gray, from darkest dark, black, to white, and various tones in between. So let's call this our dark, and this is our highlight, if you like, and these are midtones. Midtones, to various degrees. This is really very important in creating form, perspective, volume, shape. Very important to remember, which then leads us to light. Remember, these are the steps we were following. Remember, we talked about line, form. Now we're talking about value, and now light. And it's the source of light we're concerned about. That's key. So let's draw an object, a simple object. How about an egg? Everybody can draw an egg. Sort of an egg, eh? Not too bad. We can play with it a little bit. We don't have to be exact. If we don't like our initial shape, let's shape it a little better. Again, I'm using my wrist. Now, let's decide where our light source is. Where's our light? So here's our light, and it's coming this way. Okay. So what's going to happen on this form, this ellipse? This is going to have a highlight. This is going to be light, isn't it? Over here, it's going to be more in shadow, right? Sure it is. Okay. So now let's shape it. Let's look at, remember we did curves close together. This is where our shadow is going to be. And as we get more towards the center, fades a bit. And we can darken it with these curves, following the shape of the egg. And as we get more towards the light source, it's not as dark, is it? Lighten, 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 lighten. Okay. Now, we still have an outline here, and we don't want to have an outline. What we want is an edge. So we're going to really darken this. It's farthest away from the light, so we're going to really darken it. So you don't quite see the outline anymore, do you? You see what we call an edge. But here, where the light's in it, you might still see the outline of that egg. Okay. Now, it's going to be light here, but also the light is going to be behind the shadow on a wall, let's say. Let's say this egg's sitting on the wall, so there's a wall here. And it's lighter. But behind this object is going to be what's called a cast shadow, isn't it? This shadow is going to be cast. And it's going to be very dark when it's against the object, and get lighter as it moves away from the object. So that's starting to take some shape. I think I want it a little more rounded in this direction, but that's fine. Just think of the shape that you're dealing with. So light, very light, and it progresses to a mid-tone. To a much darker tone, the cast shadow. And we've created a form, an egg. I'd rather it be a little more egg-shaped, so I'm going to fix mine, but you can do that as you go along. So everybody, get an egg out of the refrigerator, make sure it's hard-boiled, because if it falls on the floor you won't be happy. Put it on a tabletop, get a different light source, shine it from here, shine it from there, and look at where the shadows are. Okay, and this is the highlight, mid-tone, shadow, cast shadow. In some circumstances, depending on what color your tabletop is, let's say it's white. If it's white, and I hate to do this, I didn't want you to use an eraser, but I'm going to show you something. If it's a very white surface that the egg's resting on, you're going to have what's called reflected light. So this is very dark, yes, as it's in shadow, but as it curves around the egg and sits on this white, there's an E on the end of that, this white tabletop, the white of the table is going to reflect back into the egg, so there may be a little haze of white here, and that makes it even look a little more realistic, doesn't it? So practice these. Let's do one other thing before we dispense with the light source. I want you to try one other thing that's kind of fun, and things that you have around the house. Let's do a cup, and we're going to do a different shape. Again, I want you to use your wrist and your hand and make an ellipse. Nice. Okay. And let's curve, we're gonna make a cup. So let's, again, plant your hand and start here and just make a curve. Now, to do this curve is a little more difficult, but you can turn the paper around, plant your hand, and do a curve, and it should kind of match each other, this isn't too bad. It does. And join that up. Now, there's usually a rim around the cup, so let's do that. Little rim around the cup. And then maybe let's put a handle on it. Okay, so there's our cup. Okay, now where's our light source? Let's change, let's take the light over here this time. So our light's coming from there. So this is going to be a highlight. Here's where the shadow is going to be. So let's start. Let's shape, remember our curved lines, dark, farthest away from the light source, dark. And let's cross hatch a little bit. And as we get more towards the middle of the cup, it's going to be mid-tone. So very modulate the pressure of the pencil as we come around the shape of the cup and cross hatch. Darkest farthest away from the light source. Follow the shape of the cup. Okay, that's kind of looking not too bad. Where the light's hitting it, we're going to see the edge. The outline. And you shouldn't have an even pressure of the line all the way along the outline. Vary the pressure. So this is lighter, this is darker. Maybe a little darker down here. Now what else is going to happen? The light is going to hit this surface, but it's also going to hit the inside of the cup. So that's going to be highlighted, but this side of the cup is going to be in shadow because this is blocking the light. So let's start to do our inside the cup. Let's do our curves close together, and as we get towards the middle, a lighter tone, a mid-tone. Inside we might see some of the coffee sitting there. So let's just make that a little. Here's some coffee. But let's make sure this is in shadow. Let's highlight the rim. Just again, don't have an even distribution of pressure. A little light, a little dark. Here's the rim of the cup. And now the handle is going to catch some light up here, but down here it's going to be dark. It's in shadow, right? Light's not going to hit that as it comes off the cup, but it might catch some of the top of this. So mid-tone here, highlight here. So let's accentuate it. And under here it's going to be shadow again. Highlight, mid-tone, dark, mid-tone. Okay, now, remember the light hits here, but the shadow is going to be cast behind this, so we've got to have a cast shadow, don't we? And closest to the cup, it's going to be darker. We're going to lose the outline, which is good, because you don't, in shadow, you're not going to see the outline of that cup, right? So I want you to practice that. Get some cups and saucers, put them on your tabletop, and practice this modulation, cross-hatching, pressure with the pencil to create the image. It's on a tabletop. So the key thing here, don't forget the wall. Let's put a background wall here, because I think what makes sometimes a drawing even more realistic, not sometimes, all the time, is remember the light's going to hit here and also be cast behind the object. So it's going to be, if we do this as the wall, and here, mid-tone. But behind here, the light's going to hit here, but also be thrown behind the object as well. So there's going to be light here, and perhaps the darkness of the wall here. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you that what you want to have with realistic drawings and paintings, in terms of giving it form, is to have something dark. This isn't dark, but dark against light, against mid-tone, against dark, against light. Dark, light. So light, dark, light, dark, light, and dark. So that's going to give you a realistic form. So I want you to practice with various things. You can use a cup, you can use a piece of fruit. Want to do a banana? Well, let's do a pear. It's a little easier. A pear. I don't like my pear. I'd rather it be like that. I'd rather the pear be like that. But that's okay. Am I worried? No, because you know what? I'm going to make my light source from here, so this is going to be shadow. Follow the curves. Darkest away from the light, a little lighter as we come around the curve of the pear. Cross hatch to make a darker even. Now space the lines wider, lighter as we create a mid-tone. Harden the edge where the light, harden the outline, I should say, not totally all the way along, but part way. Now we have our cast shadow of the pear. Darkest towards the object itself and lighter as we go away. And mid-tones. Maybe you want a little highlight here on the pear, so let's do that. Create a little mid-tone around it. As the light strikes it. And then we've got to have the stem, so we have a little ditch, a little valley, and it's got some shape to it. So let's give it a little shape. And then put a stem in there. And we have a realistic looking pear, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I want you to do that with a piece of fruit or do an apple. But where's the light coming from? Is it coming from that way? Is it coming from this way? And shade properly. So light, dark, light, and remember that. So that, I think, is a good session to begin with. You've got a lot of practice and homework to do. So remember 5 things. 5 things I want you to remember. The 5 P's, I call them. You need, in your armamentarium, you need paper. P. You need pencil. Good. You need position of your hand, how you're holding the pencil. You need perspective. And lastly, positive thinking. If you make a mistake and it looks ugly, so P, try again. So if you found this interesting and you had fun and you want to do more, just let us know and we'll do another program and we'll advance. We'll get a little more complex in the imaging we're creating. I hope you had fun, and don't forget the next DCR to tune in because we like to keep our citizenry in the dental field informed. Thank you very much for watching.